everyone, welcome to another newsletter. I'm not talking about cinema today, I'm talking about video game cinema. I started playing Immortality, next game from writer-director Sam Barlow, who, with just like the tiniest amount of wiki diving, I discovered that they were the lead designer and writer on my favorite Silent Hill, which was Shattered Memories, so I have no idea why it took me this long to connect it, but I'm playing Immortality and it's great. It's from the same person who made Her Story and Telling Lies. It's got a similar philosophical structure. You start with just one piece of information or one video clip, and then you can just kind of weave your way to others through different references and stuff. Specifically with this game, you basically pause it at any moment and then you can zoom through a visual reference to somewhere else where that visual reference was used. Some of those links are a little distant, but whatever. It's just a fun mechanic to start exploring. It creates a great sense of discovery, I'll say. You know, at any point when your eyes sort of drift across anything that's sort of intentionally placed in a scene, you can just zoom right into it, and most of the time it delivers you somewhere entirely new, which leads into the storytelling aspect of it, which is what I want to talk about. So the way that this game is structured and the way that Her Story and Telling Lies was also structured is sort of entirely different than the way FMV games used to be structured, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but FMV games used to be horrifically rigid. Very, very linear. Even if you could sort of go around and do things at different times, everything was still gated behind these sort of monolithic puzzles or progression gates. Either you had to talk to somebody and say the right thing, find the right item, solve a puzzle in a particular room to get the game to go forward. That made the most sense because it's also the most structurally like a typical film, and that was also sort of the latent desire of games at the time, back when FMVs first started kicking around with the rise of CD-ROMs in the mid to late 90s. For a long time, games had been emulating movies, and this was one step closer to that.
More slender, more aerodynamic than the bee. The wasp is a joy to behold.
There was this sort of dream that games could one day be an interactive movie or an interactive narrative. And the way that kind of took place early on, when games didn't have a lot of storage space, is that essentially you would just have these binary choices. You would be able to walk up to somebody, talk to them, dialogue options, you'd get a clip of you talking, and then, you know, it's an air quotes interactive narrative, but there's a different way that narrative can be interactive, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what's cool about the gameplay aspect of this sort of game is that it doesn't really, like, you're immune from getting stuck. In a typical FMV, they're kind of notorious for this. There's either just a BS puzzle that nobody in their right mind would figure out without a hint book, or just some really obscure item you have to interact with. Gaming keeps me energized. So getting stuck is sort of the name of the game, and that's also how they can sort of pad out the runtime. Since there's tons of footage and higher production values with games like this, getting stuck isn't really an issue anymore. There's a sort of spider web of interconnectivity between all these clips, and you can just sort of roam. That's sort of the pro, but the con is that you're not really directed, sort of. There are subtle ways the game does direct you to certain places. There is a sort of language that develops in the game, because really all you can do is scrub footage back and forth and then zoom into items. But even with those mechanics, the game does find a way to sort of communicate with you about where secrets are and where to find them and how to find them through controller rumble and audio feedback. And after a while, you start to identify patterns, and then you start to identify a language, and then you start exercising authority and discovering things on your own. It reminds me a lot of Fez or Tunic, how those games had languages baked into the game themselves that seemed completely invisible when you first start playing. And then over time, you start to discover the texture, and you start to see things that don't quite fit. And that's how you feel like you've discovered something on your own. Those moments are always so magical. And that's another way that I think interactive narrative doesn't necessarily have to be a literal story that changes. When you have those moments, that's your narrative moment. But going back to a previous point, the game does have some direction too, and that's also how interactive narrative sort of plays into a part. Since you can see stuff in any order and the game isn't technically gated behind a big monolithic puzzle at a certain point in the story, you can see things at any moment. I remember with Telling Lies, it's actually pretty possible to see a clip and recognize what they're doing pretty early on in the game. So you can sort of crack the case before the game recognizes that you have. That's one way in which, you know, the game mechanic of a game can sort of get separated from its narrative experience. But the way that Immortality works, there's a slight shift there, I think, in writing intent, where scenes are explicitly written for you to arrive at them with varying states of knowledge. So if you see something the first time, you might walk away with some understanding of it. But if you come back later after seeing other things or even mechanically understanding what certain cues mean in the audio and the haptic feedback, then suddenly you have a completely different experience. And I think that's an interesting and way more novel way of doing an interactive narrative than just having, something like Mass Effect, which I like.
Everyone you know and love, everyone, you will all die.
Let's finish this!
Where you take one path to the end, you get the story that path has granted you, and then you're done. So after playing a number of games that have like interactive narrative, your Heavy Rains or whatnot, I think narrative written for interactivity is way cooler than interactive narrative. After playing a lot of games, those sort of explicit points of interactive narrative kind of feel very illusionary. The writing that functions on multiple levels, depending on how you experience it in the game, or the level of game experience you're bringing to it, is way more profound, but also way, way harder to do. So I just wanted to appreciate that there's sort of this new kind of FMV writing coming up, which is great. It doesn't hurt that the game has incredible performances too. I really like it when actors play actors, and that's kind of what you get in this game. You see actors playing various roles across various films, and it's really, really neat to see talented performers do that, to show the creative process from a character that's playing another character. So, good writing, astounding performances, clever presentation, actual game design. FMVs have come a really, really long way, and I'm a huge fan. I haven't solved all the mysteries yet. I got to do a lot more poking around. I'm kind of at this interesting point later in the game, I think, where I've explored a lot of the obvious stuff. So now it's just going to be pecking through a bunch of scenes I've already seen. That said, there is also still a meta mechanic that kind of nudges you in the right way when you know what to listen for. So I think I know what to do. Now I just got to go do it. Yeah, Immortality. It's on Game Pass. Check it out. All right. This week on the stream, I'm going to be really generic because I don't know how useful specific times and dates are in a video like this. But here's what I have coming up this week. It's still a backlog week. Got Fallout New Vegas, going to be doing some prog and Final Fantasy XIV raids. Ace Combat 7. Metal Hellsinger is coming out. This is the rhythm-based first-person shooter. There's been a weird amount of those lately. And then I'm finally starting Star Wars Republic Commando on Friday. Force Friday, starting Republic Commando. I've been playing through all the video games based on the prequel era of films. Been doing that for the past 2 years and change. So I'm up to Republic Commando. I'm up to the heaters. I played through all the episode 1 edutainment titles. We're done. It's just this now until I get to motion controls. That's going to be terrible. That's what I got coming up this week. Hope to see you on the stream and have a good week yourself.